Chapter 14. Saturday, mid-morning. She looked at the local appraiser, stunned. Those numbers. They're just flabbergasting, she said. He chuckled. They are indeed. You've got quite a windfall here. I talked to Nan many years ago about selling this living room set. He looked at the couch and chairs. That you've got both chairs is amazing. You mean the two side chairs and the couch? She asked. He nodded. They were originally part of a large bedroom set. But to find even 3, 4, counting the coffee table, pieces together is pretty special. There should be a little end table and a large bed with night tables and more. If you had the entire thing, I think you'd be looking upward of $50,000. Possibly a lot more. She sank into the closest chair. He smiled. Only if the set was complete. She swallowed hard. Do you want to come and take a look at the bed I've been sleeping in? Are you serious? She shrugged. It has the same kind of scrollwork on the posts as the couch does. His face lit with excitement. Where is it? She pulled herself to her feet and letting Muggs race ahead so he didn't trip her as they went up the stairs. As they got to the top, she saw Thaddeus sleeping on one corner bedpost and Goliath stretched out across her bed. The appraiser came into the room and exclaimed, "Oh my God! Oh my God! It is! Oh my goodness!" He just stood with his hands over his mouth in absolute delight. So, I guess I'll be looking for a new bed then? Do you want to sell this? He turned to her. I do have private buyers, and I can put you in touch with the auction house. She nodded and pointed at the night tables. I think they're the same, aren't they? He removed the lamp from one and carefully picked it up, rotating it to check the back. He sighed happily. Not only is it one of them, but it's absolutely the same mark as the couch and the chairs downstairs. We must do a further exam to ensure they're all the exact same set of pieces. But it looks like you have almost a complete set. I would like to sell it, she said. I'd like to sell as much of it as possible. I won't sleep well or at all, knowing so many valuables are in the house and I don't have a security system. He looked absolutely horrified at the idea. Give me half an hour to get this process started. Do you have a table where I can sit down and work? She led him back downstairs to the kitchen table, where he made phone calls as he opened his laptop. Do you have photographs? I have what I took yesterday. She brought up her laptop and showed him what she had. Okay. It'll take me a few hours to photograph the maker's marks, and we do need to see if you have any provenance for these pieces. But the fact is, the furniture bears the marks, and that'll give it a certain amount of value. If they're legally obtained, or if you have some bright and colorful history you can document, that'll add more value to it. The excitement never left his countenance. She nodded. How quickly can we make any of this happen? Not that quickly, he said. I get that you're worried and want to move it. But it'll still probably be at least a week. She sighed. Okay, then I need to make sure this place stays safe. You certainly do. He focused on her. And I know the bed is one you've been sleeping in, but... He let his words dwindle away. She nodded. Maybe I shouldn't sleep in it anymore? I don't even want to say that to you, he said, because obviously it's been in good use all these years and that's what it was intended for. He spoke apologetically. She nodded. Still, I'm not sure I need to sleep in that particular bed. But we're jumping ahead of ourselves here. Let's get the photos done. Then you can get back to me after we've heard from Christie's. Maybe. I don't know which is better. I think for this set probably Christie's, he said, but I will contact them. And they will want to see the photos, so that'll be first. I do have a camera with me. I'm quite used to taking photographs, if that is okay with you. Yes. And she hesitated. He looked up at her. What is it, my dear? I already had an intruder last night, she said. After Fen Gunderson was here. I'm just a little worried that once you take the photographs and leave, there'll be, other people finding out about this. It certainly won't be from me, he said, because I'll get a finder's fee. So it's in my best interests to help you make this auction happen with Christie's. If anybody steals anything, it's not because of me. Of course, she said. I don't mean to imply you would steal anything. I'm just really nervous. With good reason, he explained. Let's get the photographs done and take care of that part. It was a methodical and slow process. They appended every chair and took pictures from every angle. As they went through the entire living room and then the master bedroom, he taught her how to check for the marks and what particular mark was left on each of the sets. By the time they were done with the bed, both night tables and the living room furniture, including the coffee table, she understood what he was excited about. So you're saying all 7 of these pieces, the coffee table, 2 chairs and the couch, the 2 night tables and the bed, all had that same maker's mark plus the same little, I don't know what you call it, but the number of the set. He nodded. Exactly. Not only do you have most of a 10-piece set, but they are also part of one set made at the same time. Now a few pieces are missing, which is a shame, but it's certainly understandable after all these years that they aren't all here. She walked around the first floor. I know a basement door is here somewhere, and Nan did say she had more pieces down there, but I haven't found the access door, and I'm sure we can't deal with all that at the moment anyway. He nodded. If we do find it as we go forward, it'll just add to the excitement. At the moment, what you have is already pretty incredible. She gave a happy sigh and sat back. Now I must ask you, he said. Do you have the right to sell these? She nodded. Nan gave me the house and its contents. We have legal documents to that effect, and I spoke to her yesterday about the antiques in particular. She said they're mine to sell as I want. That's very generous of her, he said. Does she understand the value of all these pieces? I gave her a lot of the values as I understood them yesterday from Fen, but of course I didn't know about the set being that much more. I can certainly ask her again, but I'm pretty sure she'll give the same response, telling me it's mine. That would be lovely. He almost rubbed his hands together in glee. I'll send off these photos to Christie's. I have an agent there I deal with. I should hear back by tomorrow afternoon at the latest. She smiled. But you said it would take at least a week. Yes, for the overall sales and delivery process, it could be quite a bit longer, he said. But I should speak to someone from Christie's by phone by tomorrow. So just keep it to yourself, don't tell anybody, and live your life. She smiled. He looked at her, reached out to shake her hand, and said, Remember, all these pieces have been here for years. So don't panic, don't worry about damaging them, just live your life. She walked him out the front door and smiled. He turned and put his card in her hand. She went back in and tucked the card into her purse so she wouldn't lose it. She sat down in the living room, thinking of the words he had just said about living her life, yet she was absolutely petrified to sit on the couch. It was too freaking much money. As long as she could keep these valuable antiques from being gossiped about, then maybe she would be fine. Then she could focus on finding out more about Fen Gunderson's grandson. And something was seriously wrong about Celeste's body being found on the Family Planning Center property, and her boyfriend's at the Hawthorne house. She knew the police wouldn't find out all the answers, especially if they had decided this was a murder-suicide case. She knew the questions from the authorities would just stop. They wouldn't even be looking for answers. Then she remembered what she'd said to the appraiser. She picked up the phone. "Good morning, Nan," she said when her grandmother answered the phone. "Good morning. How did you sleep last night?" Okay, she said. I think we had an intruder in the house. Nan's gasp of shock filled the phone. I'm okay though, Doreen said. I'm so sorry, dear. We never did put any kind of security in there. It seems like, all the years I lived in the house, it was a very different town. But nowadays, we have a lot of homeless people. Maybe he was just looking for a place to rest. Nan? Doreen hesitated, not knowing how she would broach the subject. Yes, dear. Did you tell anybody about the antiques? No, of course not, she said. But lots of people already know about them. I've been collecting them for years, decades even. I've had various people over to appraise them. Have to for insurance purposes. So the house and the contents are currently insured? Doreen asked, holding her breath. Of course, dear. Doreen waited for more, but her grandmother said nothing else. Where did you get the bedroom set and the couch set from? Well, that was my grandmother's. I didn't buy that. When you sleep at night, my dear, you're sleeping like royalty. She chuckled. That entire set came from her. But I'm not exactly sure where she got it. I think it's been in the family for well over 100 years. Doreen stared at the phone. From your grandmother? Yes, my dear. I was born too, you know. She said it with such a sense of humor that Doreen laughed. Of course you were. And a sweetheart you are now. I imagine you were an absolutely adorable baby. What about your mother? Didn't she want the set? She hated antiques, so my grandmother gave it all to me. And she had had it for all of her married life. That was close to 50 years, if not 60, Nan said thoughtfully. I've had it since she passed away, so it's been at least 80 years, if not 100 years in our family. I was born late in my mother's life, and mother was born late in Nan's life. You have no idea where your grandmother got it? No. It's in the paperwork in a folder somewhere. Right. I haven't had a chance to look for that yet. Doreen spun around in the kitchen, wondering where the folder could possibly be. What about the body at the family planning center? Nan asked. Did you hear any more about that? Yeah. The boyfriend, Josh Huberts, was found dead at the house where I heard the gunshots, she muttered. Her gaze studied the cupboards in front of her. She opened them, looking for the paperwork. Interesting, Nan said. Because once you realize who it was, I figure it has to be related to Fen Gunderson. Doreen froze. Nan, what are you talking about? The boyfriend was the grandson of the handyman accused of kidnapping Fen Gunderson's grandson. Seriously? Yes, Nan said. It was a terrible time back then. And I don't know that the handyman really had any evil reason for picking up the boy. Maybe he was just giving him a ride home. What time of year did it happen? Doreen asked, trying to confirm the details from the newspaper articles. It was summertime, right? She thought it was May or June. Oh my goodness. Must have been late spring or early summer. We had high floods that year, Nan said. And I know that really hampered the search efforts. They had assumed originally he had drowned because lots of the streets were flooded, and we had flash floods all the time. But that theory was tossed out the window when somebody came forth and said they saw Paul get into Hubert's truck. Oh, Doreen said. A lot of thoughts were piling in on her. Nan, if you hear any more about that, or if you have any thoughts about where that provenance folder is, can you let me know? I'll be staying home mostly for the next few days, just so I can keep track of what might be. To make sure nobody tries to steal my antiques. Not a problem, Nan said. I wouldn't mind coming over. Maybe today or tomorrow. A lot of history is in that old house. Now, as I recall, one or two of the pieces had hidden drawers. Her voice faded away. Doreen's ears perked up. Seriously? Yes, absolutely. But I don't remember which ones. And I'm not sure how to get into them anymore. I remember playing with them at my Nan's house and always finding little candies and toys hidden away. That sounds absolutely lovely, Doreen said warmly. Anyway, Nan, I'll talk to you later. Whenever you want to come over, just let me know. I can either come and pick you up in the car, or I can walk there, and we can walk home together. Ha! I'm walking just fine. When you least expect it, I'll show up. After she hung up, Doreen grabbed her notebook and wrote down what Nan had said. Then she opened up a file on her laptop, labeling it Paul Shore. As soon as she had a file started, she wrote down the details as she remembered them. Because all she could think of was that lost little boy, and how his grandfather had been so very helpful to Doreen. It was the least she could do. As soon as she finished that, she searched through every one of the kitchen cupboards, looking for Nan's folder. If that had any kind of provenance for these pieces, then she needed it. And she needed it soon. She didn't have a clue how much money all this stuff would bring in the end. It wouldn't be enough to set her up for life, she guessed, but if it gave her some kind of a monthly income until she was a little better established, she would be more than happy with that. An hour later, she was beyond frustrated. She found no folders in the hall closet, in the front closet, in the living room closet, or in any of the kitchen cupboards. She groaned, made herself a cup of tea, and walked out to the living room to sit down again. This time, she sat on the floor. Then she remembered what Fen had said about the carpet. And she bounced back to her feet. She walked into the kitchen, grabbed a kitchen chair, and brought that to the living room to sit on. This is ridiculous, she said, realizing she was being foolish. She'd already spilled coffee and tea on the furniture and the rug. She put her tea on the coffee table with a coaster, grabbed her laptop, and sat on the couch. She loved that Nan's grandmother used to hide treats in hidden drawers in some of these old pieces. That was an absolutely special memory. And she was grateful she had the relationship she did with Nan now. Life is too short, she said. As she researched Fen Gunderson's grandson, she checked the weather reports way back then. It would take a lot of research to get into the weather patterns from that time, just when they were starting to keep records, and way before digital records were made. She wondered if the weather stations could help her. She picked up the phone and called the local station to ask for the weatherman. When she couldn't get through, she got his email address and sent him a query. About an hour later, her phone rang. Hey, this is Charlie from the weather station. That's a really interesting question you've got there. What are you into? He asked curiously. I was checking the weather for 29 years ago in the months of May and June, she said, not giving away too much information. Are you hot on another case? She groaned, realizing he already knew who she was. Not really, she said. Just looking at the weather patterns for help in redoing Nan's garden. It was only half a lie because she certainly did want to know the weather patterns here. We do have something digital here, but it's not easily accessible. Let me go back 29 years ago, since 1990. His voice trailed off as he clicked away on his keyboard. Oh wow. That was a really crazy summer with tons of flooding. The worst in 100 years, I believe. Right. I heard something about that. Something about how the river rose to crazy heights. Yeah, absolutely. It was so strong that year that we had cars in the river. Were they ever pulled out? You'd like to think so, he said, but the river back then was very deep and it flowed right into the lake, so it's hard to say. How long did the flooding last? We had flash floods off and on for about 3 or 4 days because of the mountain snowmelt. Everything on top melted, came down, and we had a lot of heavy rainstorms at the same time too. Kind of like a perfect storm of various elements. We ended up with this massive flood that just didn't quit. Is that what you're looking for? Yeah, Do you have anything you can pop into the email for me to refer back to? Sure, he said. If it brings up anything interesting, let me know, will you? She chuckled. Not sure what you're talking about, but will do. She hung up. Now she had a pretty damn good idea what happened. And yet, she had to believe that the authorities and even the family members were checking on the weather way back then too at the time of the boys' disappearances. She sorted through the years of weather, then realized she needed to ask Charlie one more question. She hit redial. When he answered, he said, "Wow. Found something already?" "No," she said. "I was wondering, considering that was a year with heavy flooding, have we had a year since then where it's been incredibly dry? You know, like, where the lake would be at its lowest point in 100 years? This year," he said. "It's been one of the driest years ever. Our rainfall is way down. The mountains had almost zero snow last year. Remember how the ski mountains were in trouble?" She didn't tell him anything about not having been local back then because she didn't want to remind him how she had just arrived and was causing the current chaos. "So what does that mean in terms of the lake levels?" "It means by the time we hit August, September, October," he said, "it should be pretty darn low." "Oh, interesting. Of course you don't have any underwater radar or anything like that, do you?" "No," he said. "But a bunch of stuff was done when people came looking for Ogopogo. A research company wanted to find critters in the lake, and I know they did all kinds of stuff, but I don't think any of that is publicly accessible." "Do you know what company it was?" "No," he said, "but it shouldn't be too hard to find. They were in the news quite a bit because, of course, everybody was taking bets on whether they would find the Loch Ness Monster of Okanagan Lake." "Interesting. So you're expecting this summer we should have the lake at its lowest level?" "This whole year was pretty bad. We had a lot of heavy snowfall, which means heavy flooding to come," he said. "So the city opened the locks and let out water from the lake in preparation for the spring runoff levels. Then, when the heavy flooding didn't materialize, the lake itself didn't rise as much as was expected." He explained it very well, but for her, it was hard to process all the information. She nodded though, as if she understood. "Again, any chance of you putting that down on paper? Because that was a lot of information." He laughed. "Sure. Sounds like I'm giving a history lesson to somebody from out of town." "Well, I am partially," she said. "I've been around Nan lots. But that doesn't mean I remember all this stuff." "Good enough," he said with a smile in his voice. She hung up again, and going off in yet another tangent, which was very unlike her, she searched for drought areas in town, realizing the entire lower Mission area was a floodplain. So it was flooded with high waters whenever the water from the rivers and the lake went high. But then it became a drought area whenever water levels dropped even lower than normal. It made a lot of sense. But so did something else. She researched companies that had done any kind of deep water imaging of the lake. But she wasn't getting any true hits for what she needed to find out. Then she remembered how Charlie had said something about bets, and called Nan. "Have you ever placed a bet on whether they would find a Loch Ness Monster in Okanagan Lake?" Nan laughed. "Oh my," she said, catching her breath. "I made so much money on that bet." "Why would anybody bet on that?" "Because somebody here suggested they had seen a Loch Ness Monster, and that it would be found with the new technology, so a lot of people were determined to agree because they really wanted to see it. Whereas I was of the opinion that it didn't matter how good the technology was, some things we were never meant to know." Doreen happened to agree with Nan on that one. "Okay, so you bet against it. Why would you have made so much money?" "While I was sitting in a coffee shop," she said, her voice lowered so nobody around could hear, "I heard a couple folks from the research crew discussing their project. They were running out of money, and they had until midnight the next night. So as soon as I heard that, I knew exactly when to set my time for when the research company would call it quits. Midnight, obviously. And I was right on, which paid with a heavy bonus. She laughed. Best bet I ever placed. Do you remember the name of the company that did the imaging? A science lab research thing, she said, her voice thoughtful. Oh, I remember, Oceanic. They came in with a minisub and some fancy radar machine. Okay, Doreen said. That's something I might be able to look up. Wait, Nan said. Don't hang up yet. That's all I needed to know. Thanks, Nan. And she hung up before Nan could ask any more questions. Then she deliberately turned off her phone so her grandmother couldn't call her back. She didn't want anybody asking questions she wasn't ready to answer, and then she researched the corresponding articles. By the time she was done, she was exhausted. And as she looked at the phone, she realized it was already dinner time on a Saturday evening. Yet she hadn't even had lunch yet. She groaned. If Mac knew that, he'd be all over me. She turned her phone back on to see several messages. She sighed, checked them out, and sure enough, 2 were from Nan, but 1 was from Mac. She called him back. Hey, she said. I had the phone turned off. Things got a little crazy here. How did it go with the appraiser? It went very well, she said. Then I talked to Nan a bit more, and apparently the big set, couch, chairs, coffee table, my bed, night tables, were all part of a bedroom ensemble from way back when. So all the pieces are going to the auction house, if and when they want them. So we had to take photos, note the maker's marks, any damage to the pieces, you know, all that good stuff. Wow, he said. That sounds hugely positive. She laughed. It really does. I'm super excited. I know it won't be enough to replace what I lost from a proper divorce settlement, but Nan was the one who suggested I might be able to invest some of it, so I get a little bit of a monthly income, at least enough to live on. That sounds like something you should seriously think about, he said with surprise. Nan sounds like she's very astute when it comes to money. Maybe, she said. And she didn't buy those particular antiques that make up that one big set. They were handed down to her by her grandmother. Well, there's some of your provenance, he said. Some, she said. She's trying to remember years and dates, and that's a whole different problem. Sure, but if you get your great-great-grandmother's name, you could do some research on that too. She hadn't even thought of that. She crowed in delight. This will keep me busy for a few weeks. Of course it will, he said. Except for one thing. Did you know that the guy who supposedly committed suicide, Josh Huberts, was the grandson of the handyman accused of taking the missing boy, Paul Shore? That Josh Huberts is the grandson of Henry Huberts? Dead silence came from Mac's end of the conversation.